The newly appointed Anglo American CEO, Mark Cutifani, says South Africa could become the world's top resources producer this year. In an exclusive interview with CNBC Africa's senior anchor, Bronwyn Nielsen, Cutifani says the country needs to focus more on its mining policy and deal with its labour issues.
Mining is about constant renewal, constant investment. Therefore, our policies have to be structured around encouraging investment. That's the key. That's why the taxation debate is critical. That's why, in my view, we shouldn't be talking about major changes, maybe some restructuring. But at the end of the day, we're a mid-ranking country when it comes to effective taxation on our industry. We don't want to be a high-ranking country and destroy our industry. We've got to understand the lessons of the last 7 years and why we haven't developed. Our policy has got to continue to improve so that we encourage investment, so we renew our mines, and that's the key. The most important thing is for us to be in a constructive dialogue with government, with labour representatives, and for people to see that we're at one in creating South Africa as a mining capital of the world once again. And I think that can be done. I think this year we have that opportunity, and quite frankly, I think Indaba is a good place to start.
Well, Mark Cutifani, outgoing Chief Executive of Anglo Gold Ashanti and the new CEO of Anglo American. Kevin and David, this whole Amplats thing came at a very unfortunate time for the parent company, because Cynthia Carroll announced that she's going. She's not going to be strategic anymore, can't actually be taken seriously as the CEO. New man still clearing his desk at Main Street or wherever it is down in town. And there's this crisis in this major subsidiary, and the head of Amplats, Chris Griffith, is new. I'm not saying that he's incompetent or anything, but it's new.
Yeah, I think I suppose it's a very awkward timing, but clearly it impacted the way in which they handled it and the announcements, I think. And you would hope that there was a better and smoother transition. Look, I'm impressed with Mark. I think he's the right guy for the job. But you'd imagine that when he comes in now, there'll be another whole refocus and a few changes, and you've got to start to know their strategy, his strategy, whereas you would want really a much smoother transition and keep the strategy in place. So it's an awkward time for them.
You know, David, what worries me is that where you get outsiders coming in, the insiders tend to leave. And I'm absolutely surprised that an organisation like Anglo, which has been around for 100 years, hasn't cultivated leaders from within as they used to do in the past. And Mark will come in, he might be from Anglo Gold Ashanti and he's been around, etc. But I've no doubt that he's going to rattle the cage a bit. Yes, Chris has gone into Anglo Plat. He had a very good, comes with a very good track record from Kumba. And I think this was set up for him. Before he went in, he knew what he had to go and say. But one does wonder, where Anglos are going to go and who's going to answer all the inquiries now and the negotiations. Chris is on his own. Who's behind him at a time like this where...
I think it's just unfortunate in terms of the messaging that you're going to get out to the investor community, and then obviously in terms of the actual decisions you're going to take. And you may go through a phase where it's fairly unclear on some of their key operations as to what they're really going to do. I agree with David. I mean, it would have been ideal if they had already identified and you knew who that individual was. And let's face it, there was a lot of discussion leading up to this appointment that things would have to change. So I don't think it was necessarily that much of a shock internally.
The Cutifani appointment.
Yeah, I think that
people think he's a good guy.
I think there was a lot of debate about Cynthia's role, and I think that I think there should have been some background discussion long before as to identifying the succession.
One imagines her, whatever her competence, coming in from Canada, being appointed to London and looking at Brazil, South Africa, whereas someone from within Anglo, very sensitive to the... One can't imagine the old Anglo American, really an Oppenheimer, not being sure-footed at a time like this, David.
No, I agree. And that's why they always they had a very strong sense of the company, very strong culture, which they carried forward. Maybe they didn't quite adapt to the change, to the move to London.
South Africans didn't like it.
No, it wasn't the South Africans. I don't think when I say Anglos, we're used to 26-year-old fund managers telling them how to run the country. They couldn't quite adapt to that.
Yeah.
And I think changes needed to be made.
But the other thing that happened, which perhaps some people haven't realised, is that I remember when Tony Trayer was the chief executive in London, he was the bridge. He was chief executive here, and he moved to London, and there was some continuity. Cynthia Carroll succeeded him. There's only one South African left on the Anglo American board, and that's Phuthuma Nhleko, the former MTN guy, not a miner. So the government is quite right when it says, you know, Anglo maybe is not giving due weight, if you look at the board representation, Kevin.
I think that's a fair comment, and it certainly reflects maybe in the way in which they handled the announcement and the general decision, and maybe not all that sensitive to South African conditions. And I think on reflection, that was probably a miscalculation from their point of view. I think Mark's appointment does change that a little bit.
He also has established a reputation at Anglo Gold Ashanti of being a sensitive, although he's Australian, he caught up very quickly with the dynamics here.
Yeah. I think we were always impressed with him. He came across well, he was a pragmatist.
Kept his head down politically.
You can even hear today, you know, if he sticks to this agenda, I think, sure, of course, you know, we were, in our days, you know, when we were at varsity of that, South Africa was the resource capital of the world. You know, if you wanted to buy a resource share, you didn't think twice. Remember, Australia used to have these little mines where they dug a little bit. I mean, who thought about Australia as a miner? They were penny stocks. And yet we've lost that, and we can regain it.
And I think
it was quite a bullish statement in the midst of all this gloom.
I thought it was a superb statement. I think it's exactly what the mining industry needs, and generally he's a positive guy, and I think that his statements of intent sound very good.
In fact, he sounded more like a statesman than a business politician.
And I think that if you're sitting around a negotiating table and that's your basic premise, then I think you're going to go a long way in terms of the progress you make. That doesn't mean that they won't make the hard decisions. I still think they will, but I think they're going to do it with a better approach to it.
Guys, I'm going to have to cut the discussion short, but in terms of value, Anglo American as a share, seeing that we've spent so much time talking about it, at the moment, what are you going to do?
If Mark can fulfill what he says, sure, then it's a buy.
It's got superb assets, and I think if it's got the right strategy and it's got the headwind of a little bit of or the tailwind of a bit more of a global uplift, which is what we're anticipating, then it's a good operation.
Good news from China, 7.9% growth figure this morning. The US encouraging signals.
And you've seen it a little bit in commodity prices. So you're starting to see a little bit of an uplift, and watch particularly the housing market in the US and that impact on the copper price. There is a relationship there.
And if Mark Cutifani can take some of the heat and the emotion out of the debate in South Africa, then he'll go a long way towards that.